Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
And we're still talking about Kyle Tucker. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm starting to reach fatigue levels with this whole saga. We're closing in on 2 months before spring training. And the fact that we're still having these conversations about whether he's coming to Toronto, whether the interest is mutual, whether other teams are getting involved, it's exhausting. But there's been some updates that Blue Jays fans are finding pretty interesting, so we need to break down what's actually happening here and what it all means for Toronto's offseason plans. Robert Murray was on a podcast recently and said something that got people talking. He believes Kyle Tucker is interested in the Blue Jays just as much as the Blue Jays are interested in him. Now, on the surface, that sounds like great news. Mutual interest, both sides want to make it work. Sounds like a deal should be right around the corner. But here's the thing that's been driving me crazy. We've kind of known this for a while, right? Toronto has been showing massive interest in Tucker. He visited the facility. He took the tour. You don't fly to Toronto and spend time checking out the organization if you're not at least somewhat interested in what they're offering. So when reports come out saying Tucker's interested in the Blue Jays, I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, we already knew that. What we need is actual progress toward a deal, not more confirmation that both sides like the idea of working together. The obvious question everyone's asking, and it's completely fair, is if both sides are interested, why isn't there a deal done yet? If Tucker likes Toronto and Toronto likes Tucker, why haven't they just sealed this thing and moved on with their lives? There's a pretty logical explanation for that, even if it's frustrating for fans who just want closure. This is Tucker's one shot at a massive long-term deal. He's going to hit free agency at the perfect time in his career. This is his opportunity to set himself and his family up financially for life. You don't rush that decision. You take your time, you assess all your options, you weigh every factor before committing to play somewhere for the next decade of your career. I don't blame Tucker for taking his time here. If I had to make one choice about where I'd spend the rest of my career, I'd be thorough too. I'd want to see what every option looks like, what the money is, what the roster construction is, what the organizational philosophy is, all of it. But that thoroughness is also frustrating for Toronto because they've made their pitch, they've shown their interest, they've presumably made an offer, and now they're just waiting while Tucker explores what else might be out there. That waiting creates anxiety and uncertainty, which is exactly what we're seeing play out right now. Mark Feinsand came out and said that 2 industry sources still consider the Blue Jays as Tucker's likely destination, even after Toronto signed Kasumi Ohtani to a 4-year, $60 million deal. Most industry insiders seem to think that deal doesn't affect their pursuit of Tucker at all, and honestly, it shouldn't. Yeah, it's another $15 million on the payroll, and that's not insignificant. But we're talking about completely different tiers of players here. Tucker is a $300+ million commitment. Ohtani is a nice addition to the infield. Those moves exist in different universes financially and in terms of roster impact. But then Ben Nicholson-Smith threw some cold water on the whole situation, and I actually respect him for it. He's not just cheerleading for the Blue Jays or getting caught up in the hype. He's looking at the situation objectively and pointing out that at one point, Toronto looked like the heavy favorites to land Tucker. Now, when he analyzes the landscape, he thinks the Mets might be more motivated to get a deal done. His reasoning is that the Mets' outfield is weak. They've got Steve Cohen's unlimited spending power. They might see Tucker as the missing piece they need to compete for championships. Now, I'm going to push back a bit on that theory. We've seen the Mets take a different approach this offseason. After signing Juan Soto to that mega contract last year, they've been more measured with their spending. The GM has taken more control. They're not throwing money around with the same reckless abandon we saw previously. So while I think the Mets are probably talking to Tucker's camp, probably expressing interest, I'm not convinced they're willing to blow past Toronto's offer and make this a true bidding war. But the fact that credible analysts are even bringing them up as a potential destination tells you that this isn't the slam dunk for Toronto that some people thought it was a few weeks ago. Here's where my PTSD as a Blue Jays fan starts kicking in a little bit. I believe this is a different organization than we've seen in the past. Different front office, different ownership mentality, different approach to winning. Other teams and players view Toronto differently now because they've proven they're serious about competing. But when I hear these reports about mutual interest and tours of the facility and all this stuff, I can't help but wonder if there's any leverage play happening here. Is Tucker's camp keeping this Toronto narrative alive to create urgency with other teams? Are they using the Blue Jays' interest to drive up the price elsewhere? I'm not saying that's definitely happening, but it's been a pattern we've seen before in baseball free agency. A player shows interest in one team, that team gets excited and makes their pitch, and meanwhile, the player's agent is using that interest to create competition and drive up offers from other suitors. I still think Toronto has a legitimate shot here. I still think they're probably the favorites if I had to handicap it right now. But I'm not as confident as I was a month ago that this is a done deal waiting to be announced. The contract numbers are interesting too. Early projections had Tucker potentially getting $400 million or more. Now reports are suggesting the market is settling more around $300 million. That's a significant drop, and it tells you that there aren't as many teams willing to go all in on Tucker as his camp probably hoped. From Toronto's perspective, that's actually good news. $300 million is a lot more palatable than $400 million, even if both numbers are astronomical. But that lower price tag also creates a dynamic where Tucker and his agent are trying to generate more interest, get more bidders involved, potentially drive the number back up closer to what they originally wanted. This is why the timeline keeps extending. Tucker wants more teams in the mix. His agent wants to create a market where multiple teams are competing, where there's real pressure on Toronto or whoever the lead suitor is to sweeten their offer. That takes time. It requires patience and strategic negotiation. But for fans and for the organization, it's maddening because you just want resolution one way or the other. Either sign him or move on to other options. But this limbo state where we're waiting for Tucker to make up his mind is brutal. Ben Nicholson-Smith made another good point that's worth considering. Toronto's roster is already pretty full. If they add Tucker to an outfield that already has Addison Barger, George Springer, Dalton Varsho, what happens to guys like Nathan Lukes, who was starting in the World Series? What do you do with a roster that's suddenly overcrowded with talent? Do you bench guys who've proven they deserve everyday playing time? Do you force a trade to clear roster space? With Ohtani at third base now, does that push someone else out of their natural position? These are good problems to have in the sense that you're dealing with an abundance of talent rather than a shortage. But they're real logistical challenges that the front office has to figure out. You can't just keep adding good players without making corresponding moves elsewhere. Something has to give. Maybe that's trading a guy like Barger or Lukes. Maybe it's accepting that you're going to have really expensive bench pieces. But those decisions have consequences, and they need to be thought through carefully. Look, Tucker is better than any of the players I just mentioned. If the choice is between keeping the current outfield configuration or upgrading to Kyle Tucker, you take Tucker every single time and figure out the rest later. But it does create complications, and those complications might be part of why this is taking so long. Maybe Toronto is working through trade scenarios. Maybe they're trying to clear salary or roster spots before finalizing a Tucker deal. There could be a lot of moving parts here that we're not seeing publicly. Where I land right now in early January, with spring training approaching, is that Toronto is still the favorite to land Tucker. Most industry sources agree. The mutual interest is real. The pitch has been made. But I'm less confident than I was a month ago that this is a sure thing. I think the race has tightened. I think other teams, particularly the Mets and potentially the Dodgers on a short-term deal, are more involved than we initially thought. I think Tucker's camp is strategically keeping multiple options alive to maximize their leverage in negotiations. If I had to rank the teams right now, I'd still put Toronto first, followed by the Mets, then the Dodgers or someone else on a short-term deal. But that gap between Toronto and everyone else has narrowed. It's not the runaway favorite situation it seemed like a few weeks ago. And that makes me a little bit anxious, even though I'm trying to stay optimistic about the Blue Jays' chances. The reality is that this could go several different directions. Tucker could sign a long-term deal with Toronto and be the centerpiece of their lineup for the next decade. He could surprise everyone and take a shorter deal with another team, betting on himself to hit free agency again in a couple years. He could drag this out until late January or even February, making everyone wait while he explores every possible option. We just don't know right now, and that uncertainty is what makes this whole situation so frustrating. What I do know is that Toronto has positioned themselves as a serious contender. They've shown they're willing to spend. They've built a roster that's capable of competing for a championship. They've created an organizational culture that players want to be part of. All of those factors should work in their favor as Tucker makes his decision, but nothing is guaranteed in free agency. Other teams have money. Other teams have strong rosters. Other teams can offer things that Toronto can't. The next few weeks are going to be crucial. Either we get resolution and Tucker signs somewhere, or this drags on even longer and becomes an even bigger distraction heading into spring training. For Toronto's sake, I hope it's the former. I hope Tucker makes his decision soon, and I hope that decision is to sign with the Blue Jays. But I'm not counting on anything at this point. I've been a baseball fan too long to assume good things are guaranteed just because they seem likely. What's your take on all this? Do you still think Toronto is the heavy favorite to land Tucker, or are you starting to worry that other teams are gaining ground? Let me know what you think, because this saga is far from over, and we're all just waiting to see how it plays out.